Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing a review of China Mountain Zhang by Maureen McHugh. This is a book that was recommended to me by one of you folks, shout out to Raf. It was a story that I didn't really have much expectation for, in the sense that I'd never really heard about it until Raf recommended it to me. But when I read the synopsis, I thought, okay, this is quite interesting, and decided to buy it. And I've been really getting into sci-fi recently. I think I have a really good sense of what I like in my sci-fi. And this was a book that I was really excited to get to because I really liked the summary of what this book is about. And this book, we are essentially following our main character, Zhang. And Zhang is essentially, he's kind of down on his luck and doesn't really have a sense of what he wants to do in his life at the start of this book. And we essentially see him go on this really interesting journey to becoming somebody that society would accept with open arms. And kind of on the way, we see him go through kind of lots of ups and downs. We see him interact with different people and how those people impact him. And it's just a really beautiful story. And this book, without a doubt, has become one of my favorite sci-fi books. I read this book in about a day, I think. Maybe it kind of crossed over into a second day. I read it very quickly. It's quite a short book because I think it's about 260 pages. The reason why I was so hooked is because the thematic work and the way Maureen McHugh writes is absolutely beautiful. It's so well done, and it's quite a unique sci-fi book because of the way that she tells the story. So with that in mind, let's jump into what I loved about this book, and that is how she tells the story. Normally when you're reading a book, you'll either have a single POV or multi-POVs, and you'll kind of get a good sense of each of these characters. This book is very much centered around our main character, Zhang. Most of the chapters are from his perspective, but we have a few chapters that are from the perspective of other characters who have in some way interacted with Zhang at some point in the story. And really it's about his life, but in a broader context, all of these other people's lives, and how we all kind of intermingle with each other, and we don't really know what is going on in our respective lives, and we're kind of so focused on ourselves, even when we're like an interplanetary species. Like it's just so interesting. Like I don't know how else to kind of describe it, but I love the way that she tells the story with these other with these vignettes into other people's lives. But it's not told through the lens of Zhang, it's told through their own view, their own worldview, and it's so wonderful to read. It's very rare for me that when I read a book where there's kind of multi-POVs, or like it's written in a way where there's like short stories, but there's one overarching theme, that I like every single one equally. But I kid you not, I really did in this book. I loved every single story equally. I think maybe one or two I maybe connected with more just because of what the themes are tackling. But I think every single one had equal weight, and every single one had a place in the story. And I think that is an achievement in itself. McHugh's writing is also absolutely solid. She's a very good storyteller, very good. My issue with a lot of sci-fi, especially from like the 70s, 80s and 90s, is that it can be quite hard to read. This book was written in 1992. I have to say it's aged so well, and it feels very real, and the writing doesn't get in the way of getting the point across. It doesn't feel like a dense sci-fi book. It's very easy to read and get through in a day, maybe 2 days if you want to split it up. But it's not hard to read by any means, and I think if you're a beginner to sci-fi, you should definitely consider picking it up. It's also really well paced. There were some slower moments, but the slower moments really added to the overall story. They added to the overall thematic work, and I think it makes sense in this book to have quite a lot of slower moments. I wouldn't say this is like a super fast-paced book. You're kind of just in it for the ride, and you're wanting to see where these characters end up. I wouldn't say, there's lots of action or adventure or anything like that. I mean, our main character is on an adventure, but it's the adventure of life, not like going to save somebody or something like that, if you know what I mean. Let's go on to the characters. So I'm only going to talk about our main character, Zhang, because I think the other POVs, because I would just go into it with zero kind of knowledge or expectation of them. I didn't even know this was kind of like a multi-POV book, to be honest, but I'm so glad it was. Zhang is a really compelling main character because I think a lot of people would find him relatable. I definitely found aspects of his life to be very relatable. He is a gay person in a world that doesn't like gay people. I'll come on to a little bit more about the world after this section, but he's in a world that doesn't accept him, and as a result of that, we see him go through periods of loneliness and isolation. And I think even if you're not gay, you can identify with that if you've ever felt different or you've ever been made to feel different. He is also very intelligent. He has a lot of capability, but he doesn't always realize that capability. He's quite happy kind of just doing what he needs to do to get the bare minimum. But then I think there's points in this book where he realizes that that's not what he wants anymore. And I think, again, that's a very relatable struggle that I think a lot of people have. I think the other thing that I'll mention about Zhang is that he's one of those characters that you really do see him grow by the end of this book. And I think it's in a way that's very positive for the character. I was kind of cheering for him to succeed. You really, really feel his pain and you really feel his struggle. I definitely think for that reason, if you're going through a bit of a tough time, maybe not the best book to read. But for me, it was the best book to read at the point that I read it, because it just kind of put some things into perspective for me that I think we often lose sight of in the daily hustle bustle of life. But the other characters, all very fleshed out. I think there's 4 other POVs that we follow. We only get 1 chapter with each of those POVs. That's all we get with them. And they're all incredibly well written. They all have slightly different struggles. Like one character, I'm not going to mention their name, she has a lot of struggles with her beauty and with her confidence because she had a lot of scarring, and I think she was disfigured when she was born. And one of the things that kind of gets mentioned in this world, given that it's a very technologically advanced society, is that people can obviously pay to get kind of very advanced plastic surgery that basically means you can reinvent your whole face. You can do that to some extent today. She kind of goes through a kind of reconfiguration of her face, and that ultimately impacts her confidence, but not necessarily in the way one would expect. It's not all sunshines and roses and daisies just because she gets plastic surgery and she looks beautiful all of a sudden. There's downsides to that as well. And yeah, I thought it was, I did not expect that to be a theme that was explored in this book, but it was so appreciated. And I really found it quite fascinating to read. And I thought it gave a really interesting insight into what it's like to be a woman as well, in a world where women are often judged on what is on the exterior, not the interior. So that was really interesting. So all of the characters have some struggle that they're trying to battle through, and I think it really added to the overall story. I loved it. So well done. Let's move on to the world now. I should have actually mentioned this at the start, but it doesn't really matter. One of the really interesting things about the setting is that the majority of the book is in a communist occupied version of New York. This is an alternative history essentially where China is the ruling power and New York is occupied by China. So very much a communist society, very much communist ideals are a part of everyday life. And I just thought that was so interesting as an idea. I really like alternative histories. There's a TV series that I watched, which is actually based on a book that I haven't read yet by, I think, Philip K. Dick. I can't remember. And it's called The Man in the High Castle. And I love that TV show because it's an alternative history of what would have happened if the Nazis had won, if the Nazis had gone over to America, if they had become the dominant power in the world. And it's terrifying, but it's so fascinating to read. And that's what this is kind of a version of, but it's where China is the ruling power and they are in America. And I just really like seeing that because I've been to New York a lot and I've been to America a lot. It's very weird to kind of think about it if it was very different to what the current kind of societal and cultural norms are that are in place there at the moment. Like, I just could not imagine the US being a communist country. Like, I just couldn't. So seeing this alternative history play out, and given the way that McHugh does it, I think it's done really, really well. And I think we get a very interesting insight into what the world would be like if China did become the ruling power. I think it is aged very well, this book. I think a lot of the technological references, the cultural references, what would happen if we were in this alternate history where China is the ruling country, I think it's all done very well and is quite realistic, to be honest. And that is one of the reasons why I loved it. Let's move on to themes, and this will be the last bit. Thematically, you know, like I said, the main character is very much a minority, and it's very interesting to see him kind of go through that experience and, you know, sometimes struggle through that experience. And I think a lot of people will relate to that. There is a lot of discussion around, like I said, loneliness and isolation, about being in, you know, a densely populated city or country, but feeling very alone. Again, I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially given that we are in a loneliness epidemic at the moment, which is interesting because, you know, you'd think technology brings people together, but in many ways it actually increases the disparities between us. So that's really interesting theme to explore, something that I think about quite a lot. And then, as I mentioned, one of the stories about unrealistic beauty expectations, about desiring the things that we want, but not necessarily really thinking about the negative implications of that thing. There's some really interesting themes around social injustice, very much kind of multi-tiered society where you have like the people at the top and then, you know, tiers below that. And I think that's captured really well, and not necessarily in a way that it's done in your face, but it's there. You definitely see it. And I think there's some pretty decent exploration around that. So it's a very multi-layered, very multifaceted story that I didn't know it was going to be like that when I started reading it. But I was so hooked. I was so kind of addictively reading this book when I started reading it. And by the time that I finished it, I remember just sitting on my chair. I think it was this exact chair, actually. I was sitting here and I just sat there for about 10 minutes just thinking about what I'd read because it was that good. So good. Like I said at the start, without a doubt, one of my favourite sci-fi books of all time, potentially might even become one of my favourite books of all time. I just need to read it multiple times to be able to consider it for that. But I've thought about it quite a lot since I finished reading it. I think a lot of you who like sci-fi and fantasy would really love this book. I've never ever heard anybody talk about this book on any social media channel. I think a lot of you who watch my channel would really, really love this book. I definitely think you should consider picking it up because it's just an experience. It's so well written. Naturally, I gave this book a 5 out of 5. I'd give it 1,000 stars if I could. I've read some really amazing books this year, and this is definitely up there as one of the most amazing. Let me know down below if you have read it. Let me know if you have any questions about it. I'm happy to help out where I can, and I will see you down in the comments. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Every little helps, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe, take care, and I will see you very soon. Bye.